What if the most powerful weapon in the criminal underworld was not a gun, but silence itself? Dark waves crash against the rocky Sicilian coastline as the camera slowly rises over a mist-covered village at dawn. In the shadows of southern Italy, a code was born that would shape fear, loyalty, and power for generations. Narrow stone streets wind between ancient buildings while distant church bells echo softly. This code was called OMERTÁ, and it became the invisible wall protecting the Sicilian Mafia from the outside world. A slow zoom reveals closed wooden shutters and watchful eyes peering from behind curtains. Omertà was more than a rule. It was a mindset carved into identity and honor. Old family photographs fade in and out, showing stern faces frozen in black and white. In rural Sicily during the 19th century, distrust of authority ran deep. Archival illustrations show peasants working dry fields under a harsh Mediterranean sun. Foreign rulers, corrupt officials, and distant governments created a culture where survival depended on self-reliance. Historical maps overlay shifting borders and faded emblems of past regimes. When justice could not be trusted, people turned to private protection. A reenactment shows men gathering quietly in a dimly lit courtyard. Out of this instability emerged secret brotherhoods promising order and security. Hands clasped in solemn agreement beneath flickering lantern light. These groups would eventually evolve into what the world now knows as the Sicilian Mafia. The camera glides across old documents, stamped with official seals and coded markings. But their power did not rest solely on violence. A revolver lies untouched on a wooden table as the focus shifts to a sealed envelope. Their greatest strength was psychological. Close-up of a man's expressionless face, his lips pressed tightly together. Omertà demanded absolute silence in the face of authority. A courtroom scene appears, but every witness seat remains empty. It taught that speaking to police was not just betrayal, but disgrace. A uniformed officer knocks on a door that never opens. Silence became a badge of honor among those who live by the code. Men gather at a long table, nodding in unspoken understanding. To break Omertà was to reject family, loyalty, and identity itself. A solitary figure walks away from a village while others turn their backs. Children grew up hearing stories that glorified strength and secrecy. An elderly grandfather gestures seriously while a young boy listens intently. From an early age, they learned that real men handled problems privately. Two boys stand in a dusty alley, one shaking his head in refusal. Trust was reserved only for insiders. A heavy wooden door shuts firmly, locking from the inside. Outsiders, especially the state, were viewed with suspicion. Government buildings loom in the distance, blurred and imposing. This distrust created fertile ground for organized crime to flourish. Vineyards stretch across rolling hills as armed guards patrol quietly. Mafia families position themselves as protectors of community interests. Shopkeepers exchange envelopes with well-dressed men in tailored suits. In exchange for loyalty and payment, they offered security. A market scene shows vendors operating under watchful supervision. Fear reinforced obedience where loyalty alone was not enough. A candle flickers in a dark room as footsteps echo outside. Those who spoke out often disappeared without explanation. A chair rocks gently in an empty kitchen. Whispers replace testimony. Lips move silently while hands gesture in coded signals. Rumors traveled, but names were never spoken. A newspaper headline blurs before the camera refocuses on crossed-out text. OMERTÁ transforms silence into collective power. A wide shot shows an entire village pausing as police vehicles pass through. When everyone refuses to speak, investigations collapse. Detectives sit at cluttered desks surrounded by unanswered files. Without witnesses, law enforcement faces a wall of uncertainty. Interrogation lights shine on an empty chair. This was the brilliance of the code. A chessboard appears, one decisive move trapping the opponent. It required no written contract. A blank sheet of paper burned slowly at the edges. No public oath was necessary for its influence to spread. Men exchanged knowing glances during a quiet dinner gathering. The code lived in behavior, in glances, in pauses. A close-up captures subtle nods and tightened expressions. Family loyalty strengthened its grip. A wedding celebration unfolds with large extended families gathered together. Blood ties intertwine with criminal alliances. Two family trees merge visually into one branching structure. To betray the mafia was to betray one's own relatives. A mother embraces her son while tension fills the room. That emotional weight discouraged even the thought of cooperation with authorities. A pen hovers over a statement form. Pride also played a powerful role. A man stands tall against the sunset, his silhouette rigid. Admitting fear or asking for help from police implied weakness. A broken mirror reflects a conflicted face. Within this culture, strength meant endurance in silence. A storm rages over cliffs while a lone figure remains unmoved. The mafia carefully nurtured this identity. Leaders sit calmly at the head of a long table. They frame themselves as honorable men bound by tradition. Old religious statues stand beside framed family crests. Religious symbolism blended with criminal ritual. Candles burn beside rosary beads and ceremonial gestures. Initiation ceremonies reinforced obedience. A finger is pricked, and a drop of blood falls onto an image. New members were taught that betrayal carried irreversible consequences. A dramatic reenactment shows a shadow falling across a trembling face. Stories of punishment circulated widely. Gravestones line a quiet cemetery under gray skies. These tales were rarely confirmed, but always believed. A child listens wide-eyed as an elder speaks in hushed tones. Belief was enough to sustain fear. Wind sweeps through an abandoned alleyway. Over time, OMERTÀ extended beyond criminals into ordinary citizens. Villagers avoid eye contact as investigators walk by. Even victims refuse to testify. A broken shop window remains unrepaired as the owner looks away. They calculated the risks and chose silence. Close-up of hands gripping a counter nervously. The state seemed distant and unreliable. A train departs a rural station, leaving dust behind. The mafia seemed immediate and omnipresent. Men in suits stand at street corners, observing quietly. Thus, silence became a community-wide shield. A bird's-eye view shows an entire town under twilight. As waves of Italian immigrants traveled abroad, the code traveled with them. Steamships crossed the Atlantic Ocean beneath cloudy skies. In cities like New York and Chicago, mafia networks took root. Historic skylines fade into bustling immigrant neighborhoods. The principles of OMERTÀ adapted seamlessly to new environments. Suitcases opened to reveal hidden documents and cash. In foreign lands, secrecy remained essential for survival. Backroom meetings occur behind the facade of legitimate businesses. Police corruption and social marginalization reinforced the need for internal loyalty. Old black and white footage shows crowded tenements and busy docks. Once again, silence protected operations from exposure. A telephone receiver hangs silently off the hook. Organized crime families established hierarchies modeled after Sicilian traditions. Charts illustrate structured ranks within a criminal organization. At every level, OMERTÀ remained the unspoken foundation. A foundation stone is laid beneath a towering structure. Without it, trust within the organization would crumble. A tower of cards trembles under slight pressure. Members needed assurance that secrets would remain buried. A metal lock clicks shut on a heavy safe. The fewer who talked, the stronger the family became. A chain tightens as each link connects firmly. Law enforcement struggled for decades to penetrate this barrier. Investigators review surveillance photographs pinned to a wall. Arrests were made, yet convictions were rare. Courtroom sketches dissolve into headlines reading acquittal. Witnesses recanted statements under pressure. A man lowers his gaze as microphones surround him. Evidence vanished mysteriously. Files disappear from a cluttered desk. Judges and officials sometimes faced intimidation. A courthouse hallway stands empty and silent. The myth of mafia invincibility grew stronger. Newspaper headlines stack up, proclaiming unsolved crimes. OMERTÁ fed that myth relentlessly. Smoke curls upward, obscuring faces in a dark room. It created an aura of untouchable power. A spotlight fails to fully illuminate a shadowy figure. The world saw only fragments of a hidden empire. Quick cuts reveal coded messages, closed doors, and guarded meetings. Yet beneath the surface, cracks slowly began to form. A thin fracture spreads across a pane of glass. Fear can maintain loyalty, but it cannot erase human doubt forever. A man stares at his reflection, conflicted. Some began questioning whether silence truly guaranteed safety. Footsteps hesitate at the threshold of a police station. Others felt the weight of guilt after years of violence. A montage shows flashes of crime scenes fading into troubled sleep. But for decades, these doubts remain buried. A diary closes firmly, hidden beneath floorboards. OMERTÁ endured because it was woven into identity. Threads intertwined tightly on a loom. It thrived because communities felt trapped between two powers. A narrow alley narrows further until barely passable. On one side stood the distant state. A government building looms in cold blue light. On the other stood the immediate mafia presence. A suited figure waits calmly under a street lamp. Choosing silence often felt like the safer path. A fork in the road appears, one direction shrouded in darkness. And so the code survived, generation after generation. Children run through village streets as elders watch silently. OMERTÁ was not shouted from rooftops. Wind brushes across empty terraces overlooking the sea. It was whispered in kitchens and reinforced in living rooms. A family dinner unfolds in muted tones, conversations subdued. It shaped decisions, influenced relationships, and defined loyalty. Close-ups show exchanged looks that say more than words. Through fear, pride, family, and tradition, it became nearly unbreakable. Ancient stone walls stand firm against crashing waves. This was the foundation upon which the Sicilian Mafia built its global reach. A world map lights up with spreading points of influence. Silence, once a survival strategy, evolved into an instrument of domination. The camera pulls back from the map into darkness. As the 20th century advanced, the code of OMERTÁ crossed oceans and hardened within immigrant neighborhoods far from Sicily. Steamships dock at Ellis Island, while crowds of hopeful families step onto foreign soil under gray skies. In cities like New York, Chicago, and Buenos Aires, Sicilian communities rebuilt their lives in unfamiliar environments. Black and white footage shows crowded tenements, pushcarts, and factory smokestacks rising over busy streets. But poverty, discrimination, and social exclusion created new vulnerabilities. Newspaper headlines flash words like prejudice, crime, and unrest. Within these tightly knit communities, familiar traditions provided comfort and stability. Families gather around long tables in modest apartments, sharing food and quiet conversation. Among those traditions traveled the unspoken rule of silence. A close-up reveals a father placing a firm hand on his son's shoulder in warning. OMERTÁ adapted effortlessly to the pressures of urban America. City lights flicker as shadowed figures move through narrow alleys. Where trust in authorities was already fragile, silence felt natural. A police patrol car drives past suspiciously watched storefronts. Mafia organizations reorganize themselves into structured crime families. An animated hierarchy chart appears showing bosses, captains, and soldiers. At the top sat powerful leaders who commanded loyalty through ritual and fear. A dimly lit back room reveals a stern man seated at the head of a polished table. The code of silence was repeated like scripture during initiation ceremonies. Candles burn as new recruits bow their heads in solemn oath. A pricked finger and a burning saint's image symbolized eternal loyalty. Drops of blood fall onto a sacred card as flames consume its edges. The message was clear. Betrayal would bring severe consequences. A shadow falls across a trembling initiate's face. In American cities, OMERTÁ became the shield behind illegal enterprises. Warehouses and nightclubs glow under neon lights after dark. Bootlegging during Prohibition offered enormous profits. Vintage footage shows barrels of alcohol hidden behind false walls. Gambling rings flourished in secret rooms above storefronts. Card tables fill with cash while lookouts watch stairways carefully. Extortion networks operated quietly in ethnic neighborhoods. A shopkeeper slips an envelope across the counter to a suited man. Each activity relied on silence to survive. A payphone receiver dangles unused while sirens echo in the distance. Witnesses rarely cooperated with investigations. A courtroom scene appears with empty benches and subdued murmurs. Even victims feared retaliation more than they trusted police protection. A nervous shop owner locks his door as officers question him outside. OMERTÁ transformed entire districts into zones of quiet compliance. Aerial shots reveal blocks of buildings where curtains remain tightly drawn. Law enforcement agencies struggled to gather reliable testimony. Detectives sift through stacks of files, frustration visible on their faces. Surveillance alone could not penetrate family bonds. A grainy black and white surveillance reel flickers on screen. The Mafia thrived not just on intimidation, but on identity. Family photographs lined the walls of a crowded living room. Members saw themselves as guardians of tradition in a hostile society. A young man looks proudly at an older relative wearing a tailored suit. This narrative strengthened internal cohesion. Hands clasped firmly in a gesture of solidarity. Outsiders were portrayed as threats who could not understand their code. A newspaper headline criticizes organized crime while a group reads in silence. Silence thus became resistance as much as secrecy. A flag waves slowly while men stand unmoving beneath it. During the 1930s and 1940s, crime families consolidated power across American cities. Historic skyline shots transition into smoky boardrooms filled with tense discussion. National crime syndicates coordinated activities across state lines. Maps connect cities with glowing lines indicating hidden networks. Still, OMERTÁ remained a central pillar. A thick stone column supports a vast underground chamber. Without silence, every illicit operation risked collapse. A stack of dominoes trembles as one piece wobbles dangerously. Yet pressure from law enforcement slowly intensified. Federal agents review evidence beneath harsh fluorescent lights. Specialized task forces targeted organized crime structures. Police vehicles assemble outside headquarters before deployment. Wiretapping technology advanced investigations. An operator adjusts large recording machines spinning magnetic tape. Hidden microphones captured fragments of conversation. Close-ups showed tiny listening devices concealed beneath tables. But even when arrests occurred, convictions proved difficult. A judge's gavel strikes while defendants stare forward without expression. Defendants maintain silence under interrogation. A stark interrogation room reveals crossed arms and steady eye contact. Co-defendants refuse to testify against one another. Two men exchange a silent glance inside a courtroom. The wall of OMERTÁ held firm. A brick barrier rises visually, blocking investigators from view. In Sicily itself, the Mafia's influence deepened after World War II. War-torn villages rebuild as black market trade flourishes in the shadows. Political instability created new opportunities for infiltration. Campaign posters overlap on crumbling walls. Mafia figures position themselves as intermediaries between citizens and politicians. A handshake occurs discreetly in a private office. Public contracts and construction projects offered lucrative rewards. Concrete pillars rise on a building site under watchful supervision. Again, silence ensured continuity. Workers glance sideways but continue their task without comment. Communities understood the consequences of speaking openly. An elderly woman closes her window as police sirens approach. Judges who pursued aggressive investigations faced intimidation. A courthouse corridor stands empty, echoing with distant footsteps. Some prosecutors were assassinated for challenging the code. A memorial candle burns beside a framed portrait. Each act of violence reinforced the myth of invincibility. Newspaper headlines display shock and fear across bold print. Children grew up hearing of powerful bosses who controlled entire regions. A classroom scene shows students whispering about local legends. OMERTÁ protected reputations as much as operations. A portrait of a suited man hangs prominently in a community hall. The silence created mystique around mafia leaders. A silhouette stands against blinds, face concealed in shadow. They appeared untouchable, almost legendary. Slow-motion footage shows a convoy of dark cars moving through city streets. But history reveals that no system built on fear remains flawless forever. A hairline crack appears across a polished marble floor. Economic shifts and internal rivalries began to strain alliances. Tense meetings unfold as raised voices echo behind closed doors. Violent conflicts erupted between competing factions. Nighttime gunfire flashes briefly in a deserted street. These wars created new vulnerabilities. Ambulance lights reflect off rain-soaked pavement. Families once united by blood found themselves divided by ambition. A family dinner table sits half empty, chairs pushed back abruptly. In moments of internal chaos, trust weakens. A rope frays slowly under tension. Some members question whether loyalty was reciprocated at the top. A lower-ranking associate watches his superior with suspicion. Fear remained powerful, but resentment grew quietly. A clenched fist tightens out of sight. At the same time, international cooperation between law enforcement agencies improved. Officials from different countries gather around a shared conference table. Information sharing increased across borders. Digital maps highlight connections between continents. Financial tracking exposed money laundering networks. Bank transaction graphics scroll rapidly across screens. The modern world presented new challenges for secrecy. Satellite dishes and data cables stretch across urban skylines. OMERTÁ, rooted in rural traditions, faced technological scrutiny. Computer monitors glow in dark investigative offices. Surveillance cameras replaced whispered rumors with recorded evidence. A CCTV lens rotates slowly, scanning a busy intersection. The code still commanded loyalty, but its absolute power began to erode. A fortress wall shows visible cracks under persistent pressure. In Sicily during the late 20th century, bold anti-mafia prosecutors emerged. Archival footage shows determined magistrates addressing press conferences. They understood that breaking OMERTÁ required dismantling fear itself. Close-up of a confident judge speaking firmly into microphones. Protection programs encouraged informants to testify. A witness steps into a secure vehicle escorted by officers. For the first time, insiders publicly described inner workings of the mafia. Courtroom sketches show a former member pointing toward defendants. These testimonies shattered illusions of invulnerability. A mirror breaks dramatically, fragments scattering across the floor. The myth of silence began to fracture. Echoing footsteps resonate inside a once-feared headquarters. International media broadcasts detail revelations worldwide. Television screens display urgent news coverage across continents. Citizens who once felt powerless saw accountability take shape. Crowds gather in public squares holding candles in solidarity. OMERTÁ had long thrived on isolation. A lone village stands separated by mountains and sea. Now information traveled instantly across borders. Data streams animate rapidly around a spinning globe. Silence became harder to maintain in a connected world. Mobile phones vibrate as messages circulate quickly. Yet the cultural roots of OMERTÁ did not vanish overnight. A grandmother speaks solemnly to grandchildren at a kitchen table. Generations still carried ingrained lessons about loyalty and discretion. Old photographs fade into present-day family portraits. In some communities, distrust of authorities remains strong. Graffiti on a wall expresses anger toward government institutions. The code adapted, evolving with modern circumstances. Encrypted messaging apps appear on glowing smartphone screens. Criminal networks diversified into new industries. Shipping containers move through vast international ports. Cybercrime and financial fraud replaced older street operations. Computer code scrolls rapidly across a dark screen. Even in digital spaces, silence remained essential. A masked figure types behind a glowing monitor. OMERTÁ's psychological foundation endured. Loyalty above all else. A close-up of interlocked hands symbolizes unwavering commitment. But cracks in the armor prove that silence is not absolute. A stone statue develops visible fractures under heavy rain. When individuals speak, power structures shift dramatically. A microphone stands ready at the center of a crowded courtroom. The second half of the 20th century demonstrated that fear can be challenged. A sunrise breaks over a city skyline after a long night. The world witnessed how insider testimony transformed investigations. Stacks of court documents pile high on a judge's bench. Complex criminal empires faced unprecedented scrutiny. Helicopter shots circled towering office buildings under investigation. OMERTÁ, once considered unbreakable, now faced global resistance. A global map glows with coordinated law enforcement operations. Yet even as silence weakened in some regions, it persisted in others. Remote towns remained quiet beneath overcast skies. The struggle between secrecy and exposure continued. Two opposing forces push against each other in symbolic imagery. The story of OMERTÁ was no longer confined to Sicily. A montage shows diverse cities linked by hidden criminal ties. It had become a global phenomenon shaping organized crime everywhere. A spinning globe slows, illuminated by scattered points of light. By the late 20th century, the silence that once seemed eternal began to tremble under the weight of truth. A slow-motion shot shows a massive stone wall developing deep cracks as dust falls to the ground. For generations, OMERTÁ had functioned like an invisible fortress around the Sicilian Mafia. An aerial view circles an ancient fortress perched on a cliff above crashing waves. It protected secrets, shielded leaders, and intimidated entire communities into submission. Darkened alleyways empty as footsteps echo and doors close one by one. But history shows that even the strongest walls can fracture from within. A single stone loosens and drops from a towering structure. The turning point did not begin with outsiders. A dimly lit interior reveals a man sitting alone at a wooden table, deep in thought. It began with insiders who decided that silence was no longer worth the cost. Close-up of trembling hands resting beside a folded confession statement. The emergence of high-ranking defectors shocked both Sicily and the world. Television screens flicker with urgent news bulletins and crowded press conferences. For the first time, former mafia members described rituals, hierarchies, and murders in chilling detail. Courtroom sketches animate across the screen as a witness points toward defendants. These men were known as pentiti, those who repented and broke the code. A spotlight illuminates a lone silhouette stepping forward in a courtroom. Their testimonies dismantle decades of carefully guarded secrecy. Stacks of confidential files are opened and spread across a wide desk. Investigators who once faced silence now possessed inside knowledge. Detectives exchange determined looks while reviewing detailed diagrams. The myth of invincibility began to dissolve under documented evidence. A marble statue symbolizing power slowly erodes in heavy rain. Among the most significant moments was the Maxi trial in Palermo during the 1980s. Archival footage shows a fortified courtroom filled with rows of defendants behind metal cages. Hundreds of alleged mafia members were prosecuted in a single sweeping case. The camera pans across an expansive courtroom buzzing with tension. This unprecedented legal action relied heavily on testimony from defectors. A judge listens attentively as a witness speaks into a microphone. For the first time, the internal structure of Cosa Nostra was mapped publicly. Animated graphics display the pyramid of command within the organization. The world saw that OMERTÁ was not mystical, but strategic. A chessboard appears, pieces arranged in deliberate formation. It was a calculated system designed to maintain control. Close-up of hands moving chess pieces with quiet precision. The convictions that followed shook the foundation of organized crime in Sicily. News headlines flash across screens announcing lengthy prison sentences. Yet retaliation was swift and brutal. Nighttime explosions light up darkened city streets. Anti-mafia judges Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino were assassinated in 1992. Black and white portraits appear beside memorial flowers and candles. Their deaths horrified Italy and sparked massive public outrage. Crowds fill city squares holding banners and chanting for justice. Citizens who once remained silent began demanding change. Aerial footage captures thousands marching through Palermo's historic streets. OMERTÁ had long depended on fear, but fear was now confronted by collective resistance. A close-up shows a young protester raising a sign defiantly. The Italian government responded with aggressive reforms and enhanced investigative powers. Lawmakers gather in parliament chambers under bright lights. Special anti-mafia units were strengthened and given broader authority. Police officers assemble in formation before coordinated operations. Witness protection programs expanded to encourage cooperation. A secure convoy escorts a protected family to a new location. Breaking silence became not just possible but supported. A pen signs an official agreement under careful supervision. Globally, law enforcement agencies studied the Italian experience closely. International officials convene at a long conference table covered in documents. The battle against organized crime entered a new phase of cooperation. Digital maps highlight connections between Europe, North America, and beyond. Financial investigations targeted money laundering networks across borders. Computer screens display complex transaction flows in real time. Banks and corporations face scrutiny for enabling hidden funds. Corporate boardrooms fade into investigative audits and sealed evidence boxes. The global impact of OMERTÁ was now met with global resistance. A spinning globe appears with synchronized flashes of coordinated raids. Still, silence did not disappear entirely. A quiet village street rests beneath the fading light of dusk. In many communities, cultural habits of discretion remain strong. An elderly man shakes his head subtly during a conversation. Distrust of authority does not vanish overnight. A police station stands alone at the edge of a rural town. OMERTÁ had been woven into identity for generations. Threads intertwine tightly on a loom, forming a dense fabric. Breaking such patterns requires time, education, and transparency. Children sit in a classroom listening to a teacher discuss civic responsibility. Schools in Sicily began teaching the history of mafia violence openly. Students examine photographs of anti-mafia heroes pinned to a board. Cultural initiatives promoted remembrance of victims. Public murals depict judges and activists who lost their lives. Art, literature, and film challenged romanticized portrayals of organized crime. Movie clips dissolve into serious documentaries exposing harsh realities. The psychological grip of OMERTÁ slowly weakened in public discourse. A once closed door creaks open to bright daylight. Yet organized crime itself evolved rather than vanished. Modern skyscrapers tower over busy financial districts. Today's criminal networks operate through complex financial systems and digital platforms. Lines of computer code scroll rapidly across dark monitors. Encrypted communication replaces whispered alleyway meetings. Smartphones display secure messaging apps with coded exchanges. Money moves invisibly through offshore accounts. A digital map traces funds flowing between international banks. Silence now includes cybersecurity and anonymity online. A masked figure types in a dimly lit room illuminated by screens. OMERTÁ's essence remains loyalty, secrecy, and internal discipline. Close-up of clasped hands forming a tight circle. But the context has transformed dramatically. A split screen contrasts old black and white footage with modern high-definition cityscapes. In many countries, anti-organized crime laws were strengthened because of lessons learned in Sicily. Government officials signed international agreements beneath national flags. The concept of witness collaboration became central to prosecution strategies worldwide. A witness enters court flanked by protective officers. Former insiders from various criminal organizations followed the path of the pentiti. Courtroom footage shows multiple trials unfolding across different nations. The domino effect extended beyond the Italian Mafia. A row of dominoes falls in sequence across a polished surface. Cartels, syndicates, and gangs face similar internal vulnerabilities. News clips show coordinated raids in distant countries. When silence breaks, hierarchies destabilize. A tower of stacked blocks collapses dramatically. The psychological weapon that once ensured dominance becomes fragile. A sword slowly rusts and dulls over time. Yet experts warn that organized crime adapts quickly. Investigators monitor multiple screens filled with data analytics. New generations may not embrace traditional OMERTÁ rituals, but secrecy remains essential. A modern office scene shows executives exchanging guarded glances. Power structures always seek insulation from exposure. A glass office tower reflects the surrounding city like a mirror. The global impact of OMERTÁ extends into popular culture as well. Iconic scenes from films and television dramatize mafia life. While entertainment sometimes glamorizes crime, reality reveals enduring consequences. A montage contrasts fictional drama with real crime scene footage. Understanding OMERTÁ requires examining both myth and fact. A book closes gently as pages filled with historical notes are revealed. The myth suggests unwavering loyalty and honor. A dramatic reenactment shows a stoic figure standing silently in the rain. The reality exposes coercion, fear, and manipulation. A victim's face appears solemn and exhausted under harsh light. Communities once paralyzed by intimidation have gradually reclaimed their voice. Town halls fill with citizens discussing reform openly. Grassroots movements advocate transparency and accountability. Volunteers distribute pamphlets in a bustling marketplace. Journalists continue investigating corruption despite risks. A reporter types intensely in a newsroom late at night. Every article, every testimony chips away at the culture of silence. A sculptor chisels away at a massive block of stone. Still, the story of OMERTÀ serves as a cautionary lesson. An old photograph fades into modern city footage. When fear replaces trust in institutions, silence becomes attractive. A citizen hesitates outside a courthouse entrance. When communities feel abandoned by authorities, alternative powers emerge. A shadowy figure steps forward in a poorly lit alley. The origins of OMERTÀ remind us that systemic injustice can create fertile ground for secrecy. Historic scenes of poverty blend into present-day economic inequality. Strengthening democratic institutions reduces the appeal of such codes. Transparent government meetings are broadcast live to the public. Trust is built through fairness, accountability, and protection. A judge shakes hands with community leaders after a public forum. The Sicilian Mafia's code of silence once appeared unbreakable. A fortress wall stands tall against a stormy sky. Its global spread demonstrated the power of culture and psychology in organized crime. A world map highlights regions influenced by similar criminal structures. But its gradual unraveling proves that secrecy is not destiny. Cracks widen in the fortress wall as sunlight pierces through. Individuals who dare to speak can transform entire systems. A microphone stands alone at center stage in a bright hall. Communities that unite can overcome fear. Crowds gather in solidarity, candles glowing in the night. The legacy of OMERTÀ is complex and enduring. Ancient Sicilian landscapes merge with modern skylines in a slow crossfade. It shaped criminal empires, influenced international law, and altered global enforcement strategies. Investigators from multiple countries collaborate around a digital operations table. Yet its ultimate lesson is about the cost of silence. A lone figure stands at a crossroads beneath an open sky. Silence can protect, but it can also imprison. A locked gate slowly swings open. Speaking truth carries risk, but it also carries possibility. Sunlight floods into a once darkened room. The story of OMERTÀ is not only about the mafia. Ordinary citizens walk confidently through lively city streets. It is about how power operates when secrecy becomes sacred. A vault door closes with a heavy metallic sound. And it is about how courage reshapes history when silence is broken. A final sunrise rises over the Sicilian coast, waves shimmering in golden light. If you are benefiting from our topics, please subscribe, like, and turn on the bell notification so you can see our new videos early.